People think they can tell your whole life story just by looking at how you live. They see the old coat you still wear, the same grocery store you've shopped at for years, the way you count your change at the register, and they assume they've got you figured out. I've let people assume things about me for most of my life. It's easier that way, quieter, more peaceful. My name is Rosalind Whitman, but everyone calls me Roz. I'm 72 years old, born and raised in the city. Not the shiny version you see on postcards, I mean real city life. Crowded sidewalks, noisy trains, neighbors who nod instead of talk. It teaches you early how to stay grounded and mind your business. I live in a modest apartment, second floor, no elevator that works, nothing fancy, but it's clean, warm, and paid for. I've lived there since my husband, Harold, passed away. Some people think it's strange I never moved somewhere bigger or nicer. They don't say it out loud, but I see it in their eyes. The truth is, I stay because simple living keeps my heart light. What no one ever guessed, not my neighbors, not my friends from church, not even my own children, is that I'm a billionaire. Not the loud kind, not the flashy kind, the quiet kind. The kind that grows slowly when you're patient, disciplined, and guided by faith instead of ego. If this story speaks to you, if it reminds you of someone you know or something you felt, go ahead and tap that like button. Sometimes stories like this reach the right people at the right moment. I raised 3 children with Harold. He was a calm man. Not many words, but strong principles. He believed that wealth was a tool, not an identity. We agreed early on that if we ever had money, it wouldn't change how we treated people, especially family. Our oldest son, Devin, always dreamed big. He chased success hard and fast. He liked nice things, liked being seen, liked the idea of winning. I admired his ambition, but I worried about his patience. Life doesn't always move at the speed people want. My daughter, Alana, was practical, organized. She worried about stability, about tomorrow, about having enough. She carried responsibility like a heavy purse she never put down. I understood her fear. The world can feel uncertain when you're trying to protect a family. And then there was my youngest, Corey. Gentle, thoughtful, creative. He never measured success in dollars. He wanted purpose, meaning, peace. He reminded me of his father in that way. For a long time, our family rhythm felt steady. Regular calls, holiday dinners, small disagreements that came and went. I believed we were connected in the ways that mattered. But people change when they start making assumptions. The shift was subtle at first. Devin started asking questions about my living situation. Alana paid closer attention to my bills. Corey listened more than he spoke. And my daughter-in-law, Naomi, noticed everything without asking much at all. She'd comment on my furniture, my clothes, my routine. Not unkindly, just observant. And sometimes observation is louder than accusation. I didn't mind. I kept smiling. I kept saying the same thing I'd always said. The Lord has been good to me. Because he had. Harold and I built our wealth quietly. We invested when no one believed in us. We saved when it wasn't popular. We trusted faith, time, and consistency. And when money started to grow, we made a decision that would later define everything. We wouldn't let money become the loudest voice in the room. After Harold passed, I stayed the same. Same apartment, same routines, same heart. I didn't hide my wealth out of fear. I hid it out of wisdom. Because once people know you have something, they start treating you differently, sometimes without even realizing it. The moment of testing came during a family dinner. Nothing dramatic, no raised voices, just polite concern wrapped in smiles. They talked about my age, about my future, about how complicated finances can get, about how they just wanted to help. The word help floated around the table like it meant something different to each person. I looked at my children, grown adults now, and I realized they weren't seeing me anymore. They were seeing a version of me they'd created in their minds. an elderly woman who needed managing, a problem to solve. That realization hurt more than any betrayal ever could. But instead of anger, I felt clarity. I smiled, folded my napkin, and spoke calmly. I thanked them for their concern, I told them I appreciated their love, and then I said something simple, something honest, something that would eventually bring every hidden intention into the light. I said, I trust God and I trust myself, and everything I have is exactly where it needs to be. They nodded, smiled, and let the conversation move on. But something had already shifted. Because when people believe they're entitled to something, patience wears thin, and when entitlement meets silence, true character reveals itself. That night, I prayed. Not for protection, not for revenge. I prayed for wisdom, for discernment, for the strength to respond with grace instead of fear. What followed wasn't chaos. It wasn't shouting or confrontation. It was something much quieter and much more powerful. Karma doesn't always come loudly. Sometimes it arrives as clarity. Sometimes it arrives as truth. And sometimes it arrives as a second chance, not for punishment, but for growth. I learned that faith isn't just about trusting God when things are hard. It's about trusting His timing when the truth is waiting to be revealed. And that lesson changed my family forever. As the weeks passed after that dinner, I noticed how silence can be louder than words. The phone still rang, but the conversations felt different. Shorter, more careful, like everyone was measuring what to say and what not to say. When people start watching their words around you, it usually means they're thinking about something else entirely. I stayed the same routine, same morning prayers, same walk to the corner cafe where the owner already knew my order. Peace has a rhythm, and I didn't let anyone knock me out of it. But pressure has a way of showing up when patience runs out. It started with Devin. He came by one afternoon unannounced, which was rare for him. He stood in my doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning my apartment like he was seeing it for the first time, really seeing it. "You doing okay, Ma?" he asked. I smiled. "I'm blessed." He nodded slowly, then sat down without being invited. That told me everything. He talked about the economy, about risks, about how older folks sometimes don't realize when they need help. He said it all gently, like he was delivering bad news wrapped in good intentions. I listened. I always listen. When he finally paused, I asked him one simple question. "Devin, are you worried about me, or are you worried about what you think I don't have?" He didn't answer right away, just stared at the floor. That hesitation said more than any confession ever could. Alana wasn't far behind. She called me one night, voice tight, tired. "Mom, have you thought about estate planning?" she asked. I smiled into the phone. "I've been planning my estate longer than you've been alive." She laughed nervously. "I just mean things get messy if they're not organized." "Faith keeps things organized," I said gently, "and honesty keeps them clean." She went quiet. Corey didn't push. He never did. But I could feel his confusion. He loved his siblings, but he loved truth more, and those two don't always walk hand in hand. Naomi, though, Naomi changed the most. She became extra attentive, extra sweet, offering to help me with errands, asking questions that sounded innocent on the surface, but carried weight underneath. "How much does this place cost you? Do you ever worry about running out? Wouldn't it be easier if someone else handled things for you?" I answered every question the same way. I have enough. And that's the funny thing about that word, enough. To some people, it means contentment. To others, it sounds like a challenge. I thought back to Harold often during that time. He used to say, "Roz, money doesn't reveal character, pressure does." He was right. Years ago, when we were building our wealth, we faced plenty of pressure ourselves. Friends laughed when we invested conservatively. Family questioned why we didn't upgrade our lifestyle. Even our own kids wondered why we lived so simply when we could afford more. But we trusted our values. We believed money should give you freedom, not noise, security, not superiority. And above all, we believed that God doesn't bless people so they can look down on others. He blesses them so they can lift others up. That belief guided every decision I made after Harold passed, which is why I didn't rush to correct my family's assumptions. Sometimes, the truth needs space to work. Then came the moment that made everything crystal clear. Alana invited me over one Sunday afternoon, said she wanted to talk. When I arrived, Devon and Naomi were already there. Corey came later. They sat me down like it was an intervention. They talked about my age again, about safety, about responsibility, about how managing money could be overwhelming. And then they slid a folder across the table. Inside were papers, forms, power of attorney agreements, financial oversight agreements, all unsigned but already filled out. They wanted control, not partnership, not transparency, control. I looked at those papers calmly. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake, because when you've lived with integrity, fear doesn't get much room to grow. I closed the folder and handed it back. "I appreciate your concern," I said evenly, "but I won't be signing anything." Naomi spoke up. "We're just trying to protect you." I nodded. Protection doesn't require ownership. That was the moment their frustration surfaced, just a little, enough for me to see it. And that's when I knew this test wasn't about money, it was about trust. So I made a decision that night. A quiet one, a patient one. I contacted my attorney the next morning, not to change anything out of fear, but to prepare for truth. Because truth, when revealed properly, doesn't destroy, it teaches. I organized everything: assets, trusts, charitable plans, safeguards, every dollar accounted for, every intention written clearly. And still I said nothing, because karma doesn't rush. Weeks passed, then months. Life continued, but pressure kept building on their end. Bills came due, businesses struggled, worries grew louder, and slowly I watched entitlement turn into impatience. Then, one evening, Corey came by alone. He didn't sit right away. He stood near the window, hands in his pockets. "Ma," he said softly, "I don't think this is about helping you." I looked at him, really looked at him, and in that moment, I saw Harold all over again. "You're right," I said, "and that's okay. Everyone has their own journey." He frowned. "Aren't you angry?" I shook my head. "No, baby. Disappointment isn't the same as anger, and faith teaches us to respond, not react." He hugged me then, long and tight, like he finally understood something he'd been sensing all along. Not long after that, the truth finally surfaced. Not through confrontation, not through accusation, but through consequence. And when it did, every lesson Harold and I lived by, every quiet sacrifice, every faithful decision, stood tall on its own. I learned that day that second chances don't come from forcing people to change. They come from allowing people to see themselves clearly. And when they do, the choice they make next tells you everything you need to know.
Truth has a way of surfacing when people run out of options. I didn't announce anything. I didn't call a meeting. I didn't make a dramatic reveal. Life did the talking for me. Devon's business hit a wall first. One deal fell through, then another. The kind of setbacks that don't just bruise your ego, they shake your confidence. He stopped calling for a while. Pride does that to people. It makes silence feel safer than honesty. Alana's stress showed up differently. She called more often, voice tight, always tired. Kids, bills, responsibilities piling up faster than relief. I listened. I prayed for her. I didn't rescue her. There's a difference. Naomi's tone shifted again. Less sweetness, more frustration. When she spoke, there was an edge underneath the politeness. People show you who they are when they realize charm isn't working anymore. And Corey, he watched, quietly, thoughtfully. Sometimes the most observant people are the ones who say the least. One afternoon, Alana showed up at my apartment unexpectedly. No warning, no plan, just exhaustion written all over her face. She sat down at my kitchen table and cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just tired tears, the kind that come when someone's been holding it together for too long. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I don't feel secure. I thought maybe you had more saved. I thought maybe that could help." There it was. Not anger, not entitlement, fear. I reached across the table and held her hand. "Baby," I said softly, "fear makes people reach for control instead of trust." She looked at me, eyes red. "Then why didn't you tell us?" I paused, took a breath. This moment mattered. "Because money doesn't fix broken thinking, and I needed to know who you were before I decided what to do." That wasn't punishment, that was discernment. Not long after, Devon called. His voice sounded different, quieter, less polished. "Ma, I messed up," he admitted. "I thought I could handle everything on my own. I thought if I could just get ahead, things would settle down." I listened, let the words fall where they needed to. "I shouldn't have pushed you," he added. "I was wrong." That apology didn't come easily, and because of that, it meant something. Naomi never apologized directly. Some people struggle with accountability when it doesn't come with leverage, but she watched closely, and sometimes observation is the first step toward humility. That's when I knew it was time. Not to reveal everything, but to speak truth with intention. I invited everyone over one Sunday afternoon. Same table, same chairs, different energy. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't accuse, I didn't lecture. I simply spoke. I told them about Harold, about the years we saved instead of spending, about investing when it was uncomfortable, about trusting faith instead of trends. Then I told them the truth, that I had more than enough, that I was secure, that I had been secure for a long time. Their faces changed. Shock, confusion, relief, embarrassment. I let it sit. Then I said something I'll never forget saying, because I meant every word. This was never about how much I have. It was about who you become when you think someone else has something you want. Silence filled the room. I told them I didn't blame them. Life pressures people. Fear makes people forget who they are. But I also made my boundaries clear. My money will never be used to control or compete. It will only be used to uplift, teach, and give. I explained that my wealth was already structured: trusts, charities, purpose-driven plans, not impulsive gifts, not emotional rescues. Devon nodded. Alana cried again, this time differently. Corey smiled quietly. Naomi stayed still. And something shifted, not magically, not instantly, but honestly. They stopped trying to manage me. They stopped assuming. They started listening. And I learned something important too. Second chances aren't about erasing mistakes. They're about choosing growth over pride. Faith doesn't always shield you from being tested. Sometimes it places you directly inside the test so you can see clearly who you are and who others choose to be. I didn't become wealthy by accident, and I didn't stay grounded by chance. Both required discipline, both required humility, and both required trusting that God's timing reveals what force could never. In the end, the greatest return on investment wasn't money, it was clarity.
Once the truth was spoken out loud, something interesting happened. Not all at once, but slowly, like a tide changing direction. My family didn't suddenly become perfect. Life doesn't work that way. But the tension shifted. The questions stopped sounding like strategies. The conversations started sounding like conversations again. And most importantly, my boundaries were finally respected. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen, not as a problem to manage, but as a woman who had lived, learned, and chosen her path with intention. Devin started coming around differently. No more subtle hints, no more calculated curiosity. He asked about Harold instead, about how we stayed disciplined for so long without giving in to pressure. "How did you not get tired of waiting?" he asked me one afternoon. I smiled, because waiting with purpose feels different than waiting with fear. That answer stayed with him, I could see. Alana changed too. She stopped asking about money and started asking about peace. "How do you sleep so well?" she asked one evening, half joking, half serious. I told her the truth, because I don't build my life on what might happen. I build it on what I can control: my faith, my choices, and my integrity. She nodded slowly, like something heavy was finally settling into place. Corey was the easiest. He always was. He didn't need proof, just honesty. Once he had that, trust came naturally. Naomi remained cautious, not cold, just careful. Some people need time to process when their assumptions fall apart. I gave her that time without resentment. Grace doesn't rush people into transformation. But here's the rehook most folks don't expect. Wealth didn't fix my family. It tested them again. Because once people know you have money, a different temptation shows up: expectation. Small requests began to surface, not demands, just ideas. A business opportunity Devin wanted me to look at, a school expense Alana mentioned in passing, a suggestion Naomi made about family investments. None of it was outrageous, but intention lives in patterns, not individual moments. So I responded the same way every time, with clarity. I don't invest emotionally, I don't rescue people from lessons they need to learn, and I don't confuse love with funding. Those sentences weren't easy to say, but they were necessary. Faith taught me something powerful. Saying no with peace is better than saying yes with resentment. Some conversations felt uncomfortable. Some feelings were bruised. But discomfort isn't harm. It's often growth knocking at the door. Over time, something beautiful happened. Devin stopped asking for capital and started asking for counsel. Alana stopped hinting at help and started planning responsibly. Naomi stopped observing and started listening. And Corey? He started showing up more, just to sit, just to talk, just to be family. That's when I knew the second chance was working. Not because they changed for me, but because they were changing for themselves. I also deepened my own faith during that season. I prayed not for control, but for wisdom. Not for obedience from others, but for consistency within myself. And I realized something I wish more people understood. Money amplifies who you already are. It doesn't create character, it exposes it. That realization shaped my final decisions. I didn't rewrite my plans out of emotion, I refined them out of clarity. My wealth wasn't meant to be a reward for behavior or a punishment for mistakes. It was meant to serve purpose beyond my lifetime. And purpose requires structure. So I made sure everything reflected my values: responsibility, faith,
accountability, and compassion. By the time the dust settled, my family wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And honesty, when paired with humility, is where healing actually begins. What started as a test became a lesson. What felt like pressure became perspective. And I learned that protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's stewardship. Because when you guard what God has entrusted to you, you create room for everyone else to grow the right way.
There's a misunderstanding people have about second chances. They think a second chance means things go back to how they were, that forgiveness erases responsibility, that once grace is given, accountability disappears. That's not how life works, and it's definitely not how faith works. Second chances cost something, sometimes pride, sometimes comfort, sometimes the illusion of control. Once my family understood that my wealth wasn't a prize to win or a safety net to fall into, they had a choice to make. They could either grow or grow bitter. I watched carefully, not with suspicion, but with discernment. Devin struggled the most. Ambition doesn't disappear overnight. He still wanted to prove himself, still wanted success to come fast. But now he had to face something harder than failure: humility. One afternoon, he sat across from me and said, "Ma, I used to think money was proof I was doing something right." I nodded. Most people do. He sighed. Now I realize it's just a result, not a guarantee. That moment mattered because realization is the first payment required for a second chance. Alana's transformation was quieter. She stopped comparing her life to anyone else's, stopped measuring her worth by security alone. She started budgeting, planning, and, most importantly, asking questions before making decisions. I want to build something stable, not just something comfortable. That told me everything I needed to know. Naomi took longer. Trust, once strained, doesn't snap back into place. It stretches slowly. I didn't push her. I didn't test her. I simply stayed consistent. Consistency has a way of teaching people what arguments never could. And Corey, my sweet Corey, he became the bridge. He didn't pick sides. He reminded his siblings of who we were before money entered the conversation. Mom didn't change. We did. That sentence settled deeper than any lecture. I didn't hand out money. I didn't write checks to fix problems. I didn't bail anyone out. What I did offer was guidance, wisdom, and opportunity, not guarantees. Because opportunity invites growth, guarantees invite dependency. Slowly, I saw effort replace expectation. Devin rebuilt his business smaller, steadier. Alana found confidence in discipline. Naomi softened, not all at once, but sincerely. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace, not because things were perfect, but because they were honest. That's when I finalized the last details of my legacy, not out of fear, not out of anger, but out of clarity. I structured everything with purpose: education funds, charitable work, long-term trusts that rewarded responsibility instead of entitlement. My family knew the values now. The rest would take care of itself. And here's the lesson that stayed with me most. God doesn't bless us so we can remove every struggle from the people we love. He blesses us so we can teach them how to stand when struggle comes. Second chances don't mean lowering standards. They mean raising understanding. And when people rise to meet that understanding, that's when real change happens. After everything that had been said and settled, I thought the hardest part was behind us. The truth was out. The tension had softened. My family had faced themselves in ways they never had before. But life has a funny way of showing you that lessons don't always end when clarity arrives. Sometimes clarity is just the door opening. What followed wasn't chaos or conflict. It was quieter than that, more complicated, Because once people understand that money isn't coming to save them, they have to decide who they're going to be without it. And that decision isn't easy. Devin was the first one to truly test this new season. He came over one afternoon, not rushed, not nervous. He sat across from me at my small kitchen table, the same table where I'd paid bills, said prayers, and lived a whole life without needing anything flashy. "I'm not here to ask for money," he said before I could even speak. I nodded. I was listening. "I want to do this right. Slower, smarter. I don't want shortcuts anymore." That was new, and it mattered. We talked for hours about risk, about patience, about how chasing success can sometimes make you forget why you wanted it in the first place. I didn't give him $1. I gave him something better: perspective. When he left, he looked lighter, not relieved, but grounded. There's a difference. Alana's growth showed up in smaller, steadier ways. She stopped calling in panic, stopped hinting around help. Instead, she asked questions, real ones. How do you plan when you're scared? How do you stay calm when things feel tight? I told her the truth. You don't wait for fear to leave. You learn to walk with it without letting it lead. She started budgeting differently, thinking long-term, teaching her kids responsibility instead of rescue. Watching her do that quietly filled my heart in a way no check ever could. Naomi's change was slower, but it was real. She didn't suddenly become warm or open. Instead, she became respectful. She listened more. She stopped watching my life like it was something to calculate. One afternoon, she stayed behind after everyone else left. "I misjudged you," she said, "and I'm sorry." No explanations, no conditions. I accepted it simply, because apologies don't need speeches to be sincere. Through all of this, I stayed steady. Same routines, same boundaries, same faith. I didn't loosen them to prove generosity, and I didn't tighten them out of fear. That balance was the hardest part, because here's something people don't talk about enough. Generosity without wisdom can undo growth just as fast as greed can. There were moments I wanted to step in, moments when I could have made things easier with a single decision. But ease isn't always a blessing. Sometimes it's a delay in learning. I thought about Harold often during that time, about how many times we chose the harder path because it taught us discipline, how many times we said no to ourselves so our future could say yes. And I understood something deeper than ever before. Giving isn't about solving problems, it's about supporting strength. I did give, just not in the ways they expected. I gave advice, I gave time, I gave honesty, and I gave trust once it was earned. Slowly, the atmosphere in our family shifted again, not from tension to relief this time, but from uncertainty to maturity. Conversations changed, so did expectations. Nobody asked what they would get anymore. They started asking who they needed to become. That's when I knew this season was doing its work. Faith doesn't just teach patience, it teaches restraint. And restraint, when practiced with love, becomes one of the most powerful gifts you can offer the people you care most about.
There comes a point in life when noise fades and intention steps forward. For me, that moment didn't arrive with fear or urgency. It arrived quietly, early one morning, while the city was still half asleep. I sat by my window with a cup of coffee, watching the streetlights blink off one by one, and I felt something settle deep in my spirit. Not an ending, a direction. I realized I wasn't thinking about money anymore. I was thinking about meaning. For years, my wealth had been something I managed carefully, almost invisibly. It stayed in the background while life happened in the foreground. But now that my family had been tested, stretched, and reshaped, I understood why God had trusted me with abundance in the first place. It wasn't to fix people, it was to guide purpose. That's when I decided it was time to finalize everything. Not in a dramatic way, no announcements, no heavy conversations, just intentional action. I met with my attorney and my financial advisor, not out of fear, but out of peace. I reviewed documents slowly, thoughtfully. Every line mattered. Every decision carried weight beyond numbers. I didn't ask myself, who deserves what? I asked, what will help them grow long after I'm gone? That question changed everything. I structured my plans around responsibility, not entitlement, education funds that required commitment, trusts that rewarded consistency, not impatience, opportunities tied to effort, service, and accountability. Nothing impulsive, nothing emotional, because legacy isn't about generosity alone, it's about direction. When I eventually spoke to my children, I didn't overwhelm them with details. I spoke plainly. I've taken care of things, not just for security, but for purpose. They listened, really listened. Devin didn't ask numbers. Alana didn't ask timelines. Corey didn't ask anything at all. That silence told me more than excitement ever could. Later that week, Corey came by alone. He sat across from me, the same way his father used to, thoughtful and steady. "You seem lighter," he said. "I am, because I finally understand why everything happened the way it did." He nodded. "You didn't just protect your money, you protected us." That nearly brought tears to my eyes. Because protection doesn't always feel gentle in the moment. Sometimes it feels like resistance, like disappointment, like being told no when you want yes. But protection rooted in love lasts. Over the next few months, I watched my family move through the world differently. Devin became more patient, less reactive. He stopped chasing validation and started building stability. His conversations changed, less about winning, more about sustainability. Alana found confidence in structure. She stopped comparing her life to others and focused on what she could control. Her stress didn't disappear, but it no longer ruled her. Naomi softened in ways I didn't expect. She asked questions, not about money, but about values, about how to rebuild trust once assumptions fall apart. And Corey remained exactly who he always was, grounded, thoughtful, and quietly strong. Watching them grow without my interference confirmed something important. If I had stepped in too early, if I had rescued instead of guided, none of this would have happened. That realization wasn't easy, but it was freeing. I also deepened my own faith during that time. My prayers changed, less asking, more gratitude, more listening. I stopped wondering if I had done the right thing. I knew I had. Because peace doesn't argue, it settles. One afternoon, while organizing old papers, I found a note Harold once wrote to me years ago. Just a few lines on yellowed paper. "Do the quiet work, God handles the rest." I smiled and folded it back carefully. That had been our life's mission all along, and now, for the first time, I felt certain that the mission would continue, not because of money, but because of the values attached to it. Purpose doesn't shout, it whispers. And when you finally hear it, you don't rush, you move with intention. Just when I thought the season of testing had passed, life reminded me that growth isn't a straight line. It loops back, revisits old ground, and asks new questions with familiar faces. This time, the test wasn't about money or control. It was about trust. It started with a phone call late one evening. Alana's voice was calm, but I could hear the strain underneath it. "Mom," she said, "something happened." Her husband had lost his job unexpectedly, not through fault or failure, just one of those decisions companies make without warning. Overnight, the stability she'd worked so hard to build felt fragile again. I listened carefully as she explained. She didn't ask for help, not once. That alone told me how much she had grown. But when fear creeps in, it doesn't need an invitation. I felt it too, the old instinct to step in, to smooth the path, to remove the weight before it settled fully. I had the means, I had the ability, and for a moment I wondered if restraint still served a purpose here. That night I prayed longer than usual, not for answers, but for alignment. I asked God to help me respond from wisdom, not emotion, to help me support without undoing the strength that had been built, because sometimes love wants to rush ahead of faith. The next day, Alana came by. She looked tired but composed, different from before, grounded. She said, "We're making a plan. It's tight, but we can manage." I nodded. "Tell me the plan." She walked me through it step by step. Savings, adjustments, temporary sacrifices. No panic, no drama. When she finished, I smiled. "That's a solid plan, and I trust you to follow it." Relief crossed her face, not because she was rescued, but because she was believed in. I did help in one small way. I covered groceries for a few weeks, without announcement. Quiet support, no strings, no spotlight. Because help given with humility strengthens people instead of weakening them. Devin faced his own test around the same time. An opportunity came his way. Fast money, big promises, little transparency. The old version of him would have jumped without looking. Instead, he called me. He said, "I need your honest opinion. Something feels off." We talked it through. I didn't decide for him. I asked questions, hard ones. He walked away from the deal. "I would have chased that before," he admitted later. "I'm glad I didn't." That was growth. Naomi's faith was tested too, though she didn't call it bad. She struggled watching Alana face hardship without asking for help. She worried, she questioned. "Why not just make things easier?" she asked me one afternoon. I looked at her gently. Because strength grows under pressure, not comfort. She thought about that for a long time. Corey remained the quiet observer, steady as ever. One evening, he said something that caught me off guard. "You know," he said, "if you'd told us everything from the beginning, none of this would have happened." I smiled. "And none of you would be who you are now." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I get that." That moment mattered. Because sometimes the hardest faith test isn't waiting, it's trusting the process when you could shortcut it. Weeks passed. Alana's family stabilized. Devin kept building slowly. Naomi softened further, understanding forming where assumptions once lived. And I felt something settle again, deeper this time. Faith isn't proven when blessings come easily. It's proven when you choose wisdom even when generosity would feel simpler. I didn't feel proud. I felt grateful. Grateful that I hadn't let fear decide for me. Grateful that restraint had made room for resilience. Grateful that my family was learning lessons they could carry forward. That's when I understood something clearly. The final test of wealth isn't how much you give, it's knowing when not to. And passing that test brings a peace that no amount of money ever could.
By the time the city settled into another season, I realized something gentle but firm had taken root in my life. Nothing was unfinished, not because every problem had been solved, but because every lesson had been received. My family still had challenges. Devin still worked through setbacks. Ilana still balanced responsibility and hope. Naomi still learned how to trust without measuring. Corey still searched for meaning in a world that often rushed past it. But the difference was this: they faced life without reaching for me as a solution, and that was never rejection. That was growth. I stayed exactly where I was, same apartment, same mornings, same prayers whispered before the city woke up. I still rode the bus, carried my canvas tote, greeted neighbors by name. Wealth never asked me to change, and I never asked it to define me. People assume money gives you control. It doesn't. It gives you choice. And every meaningful choice I made came back to one question: does this protect peace or disrupt it? When my health slowed me down a bit, my family showed up, not with anxiety, not with plans, but with presence. Corey sat with me, Ilana cooked, Devin fixed what needed fixing without being asked, Naomi checked in quietly, respectfully. No one mentioned money. That's how I knew we had crossed the final threshold. One afternoon, while sorting through old photographs, I found a picture of Harold and me from years ago. We were younger, broke, smiling like we already knew something others didn't. And maybe we did. We knew that wealth without wisdom is just noise, that faith without discipline is just hope, and that love without boundaries eventually loses its shape. I didn't leave my family riches without rules. I left them principles with purpose. What I built wasn't meant to make life easy, it was meant to make life honest. And honesty, I've learned, is the most expensive thing anyone can afford, because it costs ego, impatience, and illusion. As I look back now, I don't measure my life by numbers or accounts. I measure it by nights of peace, mornings of gratitude, and relationships that survived truth. If there's anything I want carried forward, it's this: money will test you, silence will reveal you, and faith will steady you, if you let it. Second chances aren't about being rescued, they're about being trusted to grow. If you feel comfortable, I'd appreciate it if you left a like on this video. It helps these quiet stories reach the people who might need them most. You can subscribe to the channel if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories about love, endurance, and the things we carry longer than we should. And if you want to, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read them, truly. Knowing this story traveled farther than my living room gives me more comfort than you might imagine. Thank you for sitting with me. Take care of yourself, and take care of the people you love.